Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. For this fair land of freedom, I do not care a damn. I'm glad I fought against it, I only wish we'd won. And I don't want no pardon for anything I've done.
This is Rebel Yell, a Southern Nationalist podcast. I'm your host, Masonius Rufus. For our 119th episode of Rebel Yell, Macon, Fulwer, and Tyler have a conversation with Piero San Giorgio. Thanks, guys.
All right, guys, this is Rebel Yell. I'm Macon's Ghost. I'm joined by Tyler. Fulwer Skipwith is going to be here as soon as he gets his sound system plugged in. And this week we're interviewing Piero San Giorgio. I'm sure I butchered your name and didn't pronounce it properly. I know you are a Swiss survivalist prepper. You've been involved with interacting somewhat with right-wing groups such as Speaking at National Policy Institute. I know that you are also a businessman and a shooting coach, but the biggest thing I know you from is just the your willingness to basically engage with anybody who has anything connected to just community and survivalism and preparing for the future online. You've interviewed everyone from far-right guys to Varg Vikernes to, I think you had Noam Chomsky on, didn't you, at one point?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so you will interview anybody who will engage with you in good faith, which I appreciate.
Yes, well, good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure always.
Definitely, sir. So real quick, I mean, I gave the quick elevator speech version of who you are. For any readers or listeners who've never heard you before, never been familiar with your stuff, you know, our listeners are primarily in the American South. How would you introduce yourself and your work to them, sir?
Well, first of all, I introduce myself as you know, I'm a citizen, Swiss citizen. I'm a father of 4. I'm a husband, and I consider that anyone who's a responsible citizen needs to be preparing about what could happen in the future, because that's what men always did, at least European men for sure, and Asian men and all that. We prepare about what we think the future is going to be. As a matter of fact, any man in the world. And therefore, as I grew older, after being a businessman and traveling across the whole world, I became aware of some of the problems and issues that started to appear around the year 2001, 2005, with the war in Iraq and after September 11. My ecological and I would say reasoning consciousness became aware of some of the problematics that many preppers thought before. So I'm not unique. What perhaps makes me a little bit special is that I do have this Swiss point of view and this Swiss sensibility about how you prepare yourself and how you face the future, which makes it a bit different and therefore hopefully interesting to American friends who are also preparing. And because I've been working with American companies and working across Africa, Middle East, and all of Europe and so on, it gives me this unique, perhaps, perspective to blend a little bit different approaches that are common in America, but also approaches that are perhaps less common because they're more European. They're good and bad approaches, but I hope that I can try to blend a little bit that. And as you said, yes, I actually am very fond of. I like to consider myself a very open mind, and actually, like most people that are usually on the right, in fact, I'm not bigoted and closed like many people on the left or what you call liberals in the US. But certainly, I like to speak with everyone that is happy to speak with me. So indeed, it's true that I've interviewed for my YouTube channel people that are openly far left, as well as people who are openly what you call alt-right, and because what I'm trying to also give as a perspective on my work is that you need to prepare properly. Of course, you need to understand the context and the strategies. I mean, you've been in the military, and from what I hear, in logistics, as you know, you don't prepare for war in the Arctic the way you prepare for war in the desert, and you don't prepare for a long campaign the same way you prepare for a short campaign. And therefore, understanding the context enables you to set up the right strategies, which enable you to have the most effective tactics. So all of that made me, in fact, when I changed career after 20 years in the software industry, and also having my own business, made me one of the top-selling writers, authors of Switzerland, and my books are translated in I think 7 or 8 languages now, and I have 4 books under my pen now, and most of them, actually all of them, are or will be available in English as well. So it's kind of interesting to share with my readers and to understand. Sometimes I learn a lot from my readers, and hopefully I can get them also a lot of ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I definitely appreciate your willingness to engage with ideas, and Fulworth, definitely, if he's on the air yet, is he definitely.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Do I sound too loud?
No, you sound fine.
Nice.
Mr. San Giorgio, this is Fulworth Skipwith, who's our other guest, our other co-host, excuse me. He's an ecological historian, broadly speaking, but
we'd say environmental historian as well.
Okay.
Well, we don't like to, and this is like one of the things that I do whenever you actually get into writing this stuff. You quickly realize there's a big difference between somebody who understands the science of ecology and somebody who like goes outside and goes, oh, there's not as many oak trees as there used to be here.
I'm in the second group. But Fulworth is definitely the advocate as far as learning from the left. Even if we don't like their ideas, they definitely have something that we need to understand. And like I said, I appreciate your ability to speak in good faith. I know your book, Surviving the Economic Collapse, is published by NPI, by Richard Spencer's publisher in the United States. You said the other books are going to be available in English as well, sir?
Yes. So obviously I'm not on CNN very often.
Nor will you be.
But I'm very happy that NPI and Washington Press Publishing took my book. They've always been very, very nice to me. So I'm always going to be very, very nice to them, of course. And that's the way I work. And yes, my third book was out in English, published by author Dmitry Orlov, which is a quite famous collapse theoretian, Russian American. So that book is called Woman on the Verge of Economic Collapse. Societal Collapse. And my third and fourth book are going to be out this year. My second and fourth book, so the second one talks about how you survive in the cities. So it's a very challenging concept. And my last book is going out also this year, publishing by Castelia House, and its topic is about how you prepare for nuclear, radiological, biological, and chemical events. Let's say not necessarily warfare, but events.
Yeah.
And mostly because we live in societies that are full of potential industrial accidents, especially as the economies are becoming less and less efficient. There's going to be more accidents, especially since there is more and more, let's say, how shall I put it, more and more diversity workers in some fields, in some dangerous industries. There's also going to be more and more accidents, and like there was in the third world. And also because companies are cutting costs and cutting safety to make profit. And I'm not saying this coming from any Marxist analysis school, by the way, but certainly we are seeing this, that as we cut corners on costs, there's going to be more and more accidents. So as many of us live unknowingly near to chemical plants, paint industries or nuclear plants and things like that, we have to be aware of the simple things we can do to at least limit our exposure to all that. So I'm kind of getting more into detail of how you survive, how you prepare. But everything started, of course, with my first book, which you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, and that I definitely, it's an interesting perspective because so much survivalism deals with the idea of running away to the mountains, which unfortunately for most people is not feasible. So dealing with how do you survive and how do you manage the threat and the risk of those places people actually live is important and often under discussed.
Yeah. How's the sound, by the way?
You sound great, sir.
Okay, good, perfect.
I have a question. You're Swiss. Are you Swiss by birth? I mean, you're a native Swiss citizen, or I believe you said you immigrated to Switzerland.
Yes, my family moved to Switzerland when I was 3.
Okay.
So it's 45 years I'm in Switzerland.
Okay.
And therefore I'm a Swiss citizen.
Okay.
And I'm also Italian citizen.
Yeah.
But my origins are in fact about 200 miles away from Switzerland, so it's very near.
Yeah.
I'm a mountain guy.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I was wondering, because your name is French, obviously. So, is that your family's native name when you guys were in Italy, or did you change your family name?
San Giorgio is obviously a pen name, but it's the village of birth from my mother.
Okay. Yeah.
So
gotcha.
it's very near. It's very near the Swiss border. It's about 200 miles from the Swiss border. So we're originally from North Italy. So as Italian originally, I have some of the wheeling and dealing personality type of Italy, and at the same time, being from the mountains of Italy and having lived in Switzerland, I have a very organized and methodical mind, and sometimes people call me a bit square because I don't like to have stuff messy around, and I'm a bit process oriented kind of guy.
Very German attitude.
So it's an interesting mix.
Yeah, and again, I wasn't trying to get it personal with any of those questions. I just
Oh, sure.
Yeah, the mountain regions interest me just because I know with the Tyrol in Italy, there's still some at least formerly ethnic German communities inside.
Oh yes, there is in Tyrol. Yes.
Yeah, and again the linguistic ethnic association and the canton level in Switzerland fascinates me, since you've got French, you've got Germans, you've got Italians, and you've still got Romanche, people who speak in a dialect of Latin.
Yeah, we're multicultural.
Yeah, and Americans, we generally don't speak other languages, so the idea that you can have 4 languages in a country that has a functioning army, amazing.
You're getting to have a lot of Spanish speakers in America now.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, or fortunately, they tend to speak English well enough, since they all have to buy things at some point in their life. So.
I don't even know. I mean, one of the things that's fascinating is that, because I live closer to the southern border than a lot of people do, and I was taught Spanish growing up, and I had a mixture of Spanish and Latin American, like actual Spanish, Latin American, and a mixture of Spanish and mostly Mexican teachers, and it's fascinating. Whenever even people from Spain come here and they think, oh yeah, they're going to be Spanish speakers. This is like the equivalent of somebody from London trying to figure out what somebody way up on one of the Scottish Isles is saying.
Like somebody, the joke is because the Mexican immigrants in the U.S., especially in the South, tend to be from very lower economic strata. So the Spanish they speak isn't very proper. So it's.
Oh, imagine. But it's what is interesting about languages is that when you learn the language, it opens your mind to other ways of thought, other thoughts, because we can only think things that we can express in terms of words. Even in the Bible, the beginning, it says that, in the beginning was the Word, and that is a very, very shrewd and a very true concept. You need words. Therefore, when you learn different languages, you learn different ways of thinking, and it opens your mind to many things. In fact, I'm actually, for example, I'm very proud of the culture I'm from. However, I'm a very, very, very open-minded guy in terms of learning cultures all over the world. And actually, for example, there's a saying, by the way, who says that, someone who do not speak English is going to have a lot of problems in this world, but someone who only knows English is also going to have a lot of problems in this world. And you can extrapolate that to any language. And in fact, I'm someone who's traveled so much. I've probably visited over 100 countries in the world through my work and different travels. And I really love every culture in the world, provided it doesn't want to push that culture to me. And also, of course, I'm playing the game where I'm not trying to push my culture to them. So I would rather have every people of the world and every culture in the world being able to exchange culturally by learned people instead of mass migration and colonization, whether it's economical or physical. And so I'm a very difficult guy to put a label on, because when actually, for example, leftists try to push me into the whatever far right, and you know how it is, racist, all this nonsense. In fact, when they listen to my interviews, and when they see me interview black people in Africa, black nationalists in Africa, for example, one of my good friends is an African ethno nationalist, and we get along very well because he understands what's good for his nation, and that includes having less multinationals pillaging his country. And I'm for the well-being of my nation, which means less people from foreign countries, including Africans, coming in and taking welfare and doing whatever they do, and which the statistics show, without a doubt. And he's agreeing with that as well. And he says to African people in Europe, "Go away, go back to Africa." And I'm saying to white people in Africa to say, well, look, if you're part of the pillaging process, you shouldn't be there. If you're there for 400 years, like in South Africa, okay, it's a different story. But we get along and we understand that. So this is possible for me because I've traveled and because I've learned quite a lot of languages, and so it's interesting, and I think you can really do that. So I'm a sort of a weird cosmopolite because I have roots. I'm not a cosmopolite without roots, which is a problem for some of these people, like these billionaires like Soros, which are trying to create a world which makes no sense because it's a world without any roots. I have roots, therefore I can go to other cultures and extend goodwill, and I can befriend them, provided they are who they are and they don't try to become me, and provided they don't want to conquer me. And then, because otherwise it's war, and this has been going on for forever in history of mankind. So I'm actually a guy who likes peace. And so this paradoxical approach makes me very difficult to label. Of course, they do label me as they do all of us, but it makes it very difficult to have any argument that is really sticky.
We were talking about this the other day on a call. I can't remember who was on it, or Mencken might have been there. And we were actually talking to because we live in the American South, and the American South borders Mexico, and so we get a lot of spillover, and there's a question about what do you do with Mexican American conservatives or something like that. And the opinion I have on it is, I have a difficult time getting along with a lot of the ostensible conservative Mexican Americans who live here. However, if you go actually across the border, because I've been to Mexico a few times, I get along with Mexicans in Mexico, just fine. And that's generally because if they wanted to be somewhere else, they could go. You can hop the border pretty easily. It's the fact that they want to be in Mexico and makes them, really thoroughly Mexican. And we have there's all of these groups like La Raza, Mexican nationalists in the United States or whatever. I think that's a real good distinction between different types of nationalisms. There's the nationalism of the Mexican in Mexico, and then there's the nationalism of the Mexican in Nebraska. Yeah. And those are different things.
Yes, well, for sure. I think that what is interesting is that in fact the people who start to think like us are in fact the tolerant ones, because when you and I do know some of the circles that are the champagne liberals that you find in New York City, in Hollywood, in San Francisco, and of course in the big towns of Europe. these guys don't mix. These guys don't, the way they see relationship with poor people is through a lens of dominance. It's through a lens of I employ the Latino maid, I employ the black driver, chauffeur, and so on. So and they certainly don't live in areas that are multicultural, except for the fancy restaurant, because they find so nice to go to the Afghani restaurant, but they don't want to have an Afghani Muslim neighbor. And so, in fact, the hypocrisy is very shining. It's very, you can see it from afar, and this is why they can't win politically on with the ideas. They can only win, as they often do, with the propaganda and with lies and with the ethnic vote, which of course I think we are all aware that we see in Europe, for example, the immigrants from Europe, from Middle East and Africa in Europe, they vote on the left at 90% when they vote. So obviously it's a way to tilt the scales in the election process, and it's a way to inevitably bring us to very physical conflicts, because eventually people do not accept to be replaced on their own soil. So the tensions are starting to grow, and the political reaction, as you've seen from the elections, of course, in Italy, as the unrest in France right now, but also the very strong opinion of the Hungarian, Polish, Czech, Eastern and Central European nations to refuse any immigration, because they've seen what's happening to UK, to France, to Belgium, to Netherlands, to Germany, and they've seen, and they well understand, because they still have they have not been in the propaganda as much as the Western countries have been in, and therefore they see that this is going to bring problems. I mentioned this in details in my second book, the one I mentioned about the cities, because obviously the countryside, I'm sure in the US as well, or in Europe for sure, doesn't have these kind of problems. When you're in the mountains in Switzerland, in the town I live, we're probably 1,000 people, and there's probably 4 people who are, not from Europe, not from Europe, and these 4 people are perfectly fine, because obviously there's no other choice for them. They cannot go out and create problems. There are 4 out of 1,000, and that's one family. A man and his husband and his wife and 2 children. So there's no problems, obviously, because the numbers are small. We don't have a ghetto in the mountains, of course, with where I live. But in the cities, as you know, Chicago, Atlanta, and all these wonderful places people the leftists love to live in. Well, it becomes problematic. So we are the tolerant ones. In fact, we are the ones who are respectful. We are the ones who are open-minded, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like you said, the elite, as cliched as the word globalist has become, that's probably the most accurate term for them. And they literally do have more connection to people of that class, in other major metropolises in the world than they do with, co-ethnics of the same nationality who speak the same language, 100 miles away from them in the heartland of whatever country.
I've started calling them the Eloise. From the I think it's Jules Verne, the time traveler book.
Oh yeah, the
Eloise. Oh yes, interesting.
Yeah.
No, real Marxist hours.
Yeah, but you mentioned the limousine liberal class, and you were just talking about them for quite a bit. That reminds me. I saw it was scrolled across my feed that in Davos a couple of days ago, I guess it was, there was some sort of, climate gathering or something like that. And it attracted I think it was the largest collection of private jets anywhere this year. And I was like, oh man. Yeah. I wonder what kind of just terrible stuff is going on in there right now.
Well,
I've actually been to Davos once. I was invited to greet some of these very rich software billionaires. That was a long time ago, probably 15 years ago. And I was doing that as I was working for a very large software San Francisco-based software company, and because I knew many languages, I could talk with these guys. So Michael Dell, and there was even Peter Gabriel that was there. So you have these very rich people, these very progressive artists and things like that, and I understand the way they think. I understand very well how they think. They don't for them they think everyone thinks is doing the good of others, and usually you have to beware of people who try to make new people out of you, the Marxists, the Nazis, whoever in history has tried to create the new man, this idea that came from the French Revolution, and which is a Freemason idea as well. This is very dangerous, because if you think you're doing good, well, then the means just the ends justify the means, and therefore the communist was supposedly to be such a great idea. Communists is so great, so it's okay if we kill 100 million people in the process. Well, obviously, no, it's not okay. And so these people are they are pushing. They say, no, we need immigration is not working, therefore we need more immigration. And now, of course, they are seeing the backlash, and people are, because of internet. The people, they're not stupid. They don't think that there is this lizard people hiding and controlling. No. We know very well who it is. We know very well the names. We know the addresses. We know everyone. And we're not on the doorsteps because we still have stuff in our fridges, right? But they know very well that this is the end. So I think that this class of people is starting to change. They are starting to change the point of view. And this is why, by the way, quite a lot of them are actually preparing in buying land in New Zealand, in Argentina, in Uruguay. They are kind of seeing the winds changing direction, and they're hedging their bets. And actually, I wouldn't be surprised that the pendulum of these rich people who were very much on the left is going to swing very, very hard the opposite way, because for them it's a question of survival. And for example, I know I used to know some of very rich Jewish billionaires, and they were all for immigration, because they said, oh, it's great because these guys have the Muslims they meet and the blacks that they meet, they're all very smart, and they work in IT. They are super smart engineers, and they don't live. They live in Mountain View, in near Palo Alto. They live in the Hamptons in New York, or in nice areas north of Boston. They're not in the ghetto. But suddenly, when the country has a lot of Muslims, these same Jewish billionaires start to say, hold on a second, but Muslims actually don't like Jews. And they
that awkward moment of realization.
Yeah, exactly. And the black people are also a problem for rich Jews, And so they start to say, well, maybe I'm going to change the way I influence politics. And especially when you confront to them, and I really always say, I say to a lot of people sometimes don't understand what I'm saying, but I say, I know Israel very well. I've sold millions of dollars worth of stuff to them. And I tell to people, look, Israel, we should learn from them. They are an ethno state. They don't take immigrants from all over the world. They have problems as well. They have very weird culture in Tel Aviv. They have gay pride. They have things that I think, a bit strange, but okay. But we don't have to emulate that, but we can take the idea of border, the idea of wall, the idea of not letting terrorists inside the country. And so when you tell this to Jewish people, they're like, well, of course we do that. But and so there is a moment of cognitive dissonance. And therefore it's very easy, it's at that point, it's very easy to bring them, let's say, on our side, in the sense that they have to admit that what they do in Israel, well, we should do as well. And, rather than the opposite. So it's a dialectic way to convince many people to show look, if you think what Israel does is correct, well, then we should do perhaps the same thing. I'm not saying we should bomb people in Gaza, by the way. or at least not yet. But certainly we should do that. However, what we should or shouldn't do is just an idea, and if we can influence people, that's fine. However, what I focus in my books is not about what we should or shouldn't do as nations. I talk in my books to what we should do or what we can do as individuals or families or groups of people or group of families, because a lot of people lose themselves in trying to find global solutions to global problems, or they enjoy the talking of politics at a geostrategic scale. And while it's fun and interesting, unless you are a very influential guy or a very rich guy who can buy influence, you're not going to change much. It's nice to have your opinion. It's very courageous in this world to voice your opinion if it's against the political correctness. However, you're not going to change much. What you can change a lot about is about how you live and how you behave and how you prepare. And this is really the topic that I focus on my book. But you see where I want to go is that we have to understand the strategies. We have to understand the way the world is going so that we don't waste our preparation. However, we have to focus our efforts on what we can manage, on what we can really influence.
Yeah, I agree completely. And our normal primary host, Masonius Rufus, who isn't here today, is a big fan of that point that actual prepping, the most important thing is organization and the development and perpetuation of community at whatever level you're at. So I agree completely. And I add, when I talk to Americans and Southerners about that ultimately it's not an either or point in the strategy. Ultimately, if you want to do anything on a geostrategic level, it ultimately comes down to building coalitions, and the community is the building block of that. So it doesn't matter what happens in the future, building community and networking and cooperation is the first step for all of those, responses.
Yes. In fact, and it's interesting, one of the hosts tonight here, as you said, you're a historian of ecological, you have different, let's say, parishes. Some people come to me and says, we're all going to die because the world is going to be 1 degree hotter. Another guy comes and say, okay, and I agree with that, for example, that, okay, we have reached peak oil and now there's going to be less oil and therefore we're all going to die. and some people come and say, oh, we have so much debt that there's going to be hyperinflation and my God, we're all going to die. I say, well, hold on a second. Whatever happens, yes, there's going to be problems. There are going to be collapses. Some are going to be, some scenarios are going to be extremely difficult for most people because of the logistics and the supply chains that get broken when there's major disruption in a society, in an economical texture, fabric of a society. However, you shouldn't prepare for global warming. You shouldn't prepare for hyperinflation. You shouldn't prepare for one thing or the other. You should have an attitude of preparation, and you should put some means behind that attitude and that idea. But if you prepare for one scenario only, or if you try to prepare for every single possible scenario, you're going to lose and waste yourself and waste resources because you are chasing the rabbit to an infinite rabbit hole because the scenarios are infinite. And if you only do one scenario, you're missing on everything else. So you have to really think. And this is what I did when I started to think about what I did for my own family, of what it means more difficult times. So maybe it means you should live into a place that is where life is healthier, is better. It's where you have a community that is more genuine. It's more honest. You don't have to spend $100,000 to have security for your physical security in your house. If your neighbors are honest and don't steal, you don't need to have surveillance cameras in your house, and you don't need to have I do have a lot, but you don't need to have a lot of guns if your neighbors also have a lot of guns and are like you and they think like you and they are your friends. So you know what I mean? Therefore, it's the attitude that matters, and that attitude needs to be one of not fear, but one of I'm trying to build a better life for my family, myself, my community, and not reacting in fear and having this mentality of the bunker mentality, what we usually call bunkerization. You don't win wars by hiding in a bunker. You have to be outside at some point. And what it means on what you actually do could also mean that, yes, maybe you have a cellar full of food because you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe you do have a garden where you grow your own vegetables. Maybe you tend your animals and you try to gain self-sufficiency in terms of food, of energy with, I don't know, solar panels. And yes, you prepare, you homestead, you do a lot of these things. But the strategy starts with one of a positive attitude, in fact. And this is why, for example, I'm hated by journalists because they always try to interview me and try to get that that 5-minute interview where they can show that I'm this evil I don't know, Nazi guy with lots of guns wanting to kill everyone. And when they interview me, they don't get that answer. They get the answer of, you need to be positive. It's about your family. It's about an attitude of responsibility about what's happening in the future, of being less dependent of the government, less dependent of others. So it's a culture of freedom. And of course, they don't want that. They don't want that message. So usually they interview me, and that interview never goes online, never goes on air, because they usually keep my opinions on immigration. That's for sure. They keep that, but that's okay. And you see this approach is one that resonates usually with Americans, because I know America pretty well, and there's a lot of common ideas between Switzerland and in fact also Italy, but Switzerland and America share almost the same constitution. In fact, Switzerland took the American constitution and modified a little bit and used it for itself when they needed a new constitution in the 19th century. And we took the ones from America because it's the best. You guys have the best. At the time, you had the best geniuses that brought this Bill of Rights and Constitution.
Yeah, you famously took out the executive branch when you adopted it, which we kept and probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, it's true. We made it a little bit different, and in fact, we're a little bit because the Constitution we took it in 1848, so it was before you had the Civil War, and therefore we kept the strong power of the states, and not which we call canton. But it's not. We don't have as much centralized as you have in terms of the executive and in terms of legislative power. The states have a lot of power and a lot of weight.
What's sort of fascinating is that the 1789 Constitution or whatever, it was a pretty good one, especially for 1789.
Sure.
But the European governments that adopted it or used it as a model, especially Switzerland, eliminated the executive branch. But it's really fascinating because when the Confederacy decided that they were going to, fix some problems with the Constitution, they sort of went the other way with it, and they increased executive power, made the term longer, and disallowed consecutive terms. Which I thought that's another that's an interesting
approach.
Interesting permutation of it. Yeah, and I wonder if that 1848 date means much, because that's right as Europe explodes.
I promise you, they were aware of it in the room where they accepted that document.
In fact, I think I did a mistake. It's 1849 in Switzerland.
Then it definitely mattered.
It does coincide with the big revolutions of Europe, which mostly failed. But there were big social revolutions in those times in Europe, in almost every country.
Those 1848 revolutions. I've been because this has been talking about these in the context of American history quite a bit lately. They were kind of a dud in Europe. The only thing they really do in Europe broadly is sort of create the modern political alignments.
Yes.
Where the nation states are sort of align and adopt this sort of nationalism, because prior to that nationalism had been a left-wing term, but it's sort of a sleeping giant in American history, because all of those revolutionaries that failed in Europe hopped on a boat and came to the United States, and that's where vast portions of our population usually came from. They were called the 48ers.
The Germans.
That's true, and I think there was also a large number of let's say Russians, if not ethnic. They were not ethnically Russian, but a lot of Russian revolutionaries against Tsar Alexander III and Nicholas I, not Nicholas II, Nicholas I. At the turn of the century, were expelled by Russia because of their revolutionary activities, and ended up in America and started to seed little by little in the universities and that those revolutionary ideas, which we now are common in the campuses, in fact. Yeah. Interesting topics.
Yeah, that's where most of the largest portion of the Jewish population in the U.S. traces their identity to, because prior to that, most of them were in the South, and they were mostly from Sephardic communities that were unrelated. But even the ethnic bulk of the United States population, the German population, the majority of them came over as a result of the 1840 revolution, either directly or indirectly. And again, the Civil War was definitely influenced by a lot of those revolutionary thinkers, and they became a force behind the Union. But they also ended up in other places. Like a lot of them ended up in Texas, and the Texas frontier was an odd place for communists to go, and they didn't remain communists for very long once they got to the frontier.
Well, at least in 1848, the term communist didn't exist really, I think, because that's actually true. When Marx started to have some of its oddest ideas. He was still young then, but yeah, it's true.
Yeah, Communist Manifesto is published. It is, and that, I believe that's the book in which he coined the phrase communism.
Yes.
But it was written initially, and this is way before Das Kapital. Okay, Marx is incredible. Marx and Engels are both young dudes, and the Communist Manifesto is literally a barricade pamphlet. It's like something that you could, because the 1848 revolutions, there were all kinds of different varieties of socialists and nationalists. It was just sort of a smorgasbord of different ideologies. And so the reason communism comes out as, and Marxist, Marxist socialism is the one that comes out, is because he wrote the book that got passed around to the most people, in the year 1848.
Yeah, I think the people then had a lot of. I read mostly Rousseau, which was I don't like his ideas at all. But even before, I think the terms commune is also something you find quite a lot in the terms of communal lands that a lot of people in around the cities in France for sure, but I think the biggest ones were in England. Under when the Magna Carta was written, there was parts of it clearly stipulated that some of the communal lands, could not be taken over by the king, and those lands were kind of shared by the peasants, free peasants that could grow their own food there, and I think we have a lot of remembrance of those times, because then those communal lands were confiscated by some of the not the nobles, but the merchants classes in England, and hence a lot of English people had to move to America because of the confiscation of those lands. And it's a long story. I'm not a specialist of the English revolutions of the 18th century, but yeah. There's a lot of good things with sharing and having things in common with others, and I think part of the human psyche is about sharing and helping others. Of course, what I don't know if Marx understood that, sitting from his desk and trying to screw his cleaning lady, but there's definitely willingness to share with people who are like you, and this is why the community aspect is very important. Whether it's the same culture, maybe the same religion, or the same ethnic background, you share more easily usually with people who are like you, who think like you, and because you can reciprocate, or you hope they reciprocate. Whether when you share with people who are from far away, usually it's to buy, it's a posture. It's not genuine sharing, because you are actually making a statement and you're not in the process of long-term relationship building. And so ancient communities, people from 15,000 years ago, the first agricultural communities, and even before the hunter-gatherers, they do have a culture of strong commune labor, of strong sharing of work. Even my grandfather's, he built his own house on his own, but he didn't do it alone. All the men from the village helped, and so whenever someone was young and getting married, everyone was helping him build his house. So that creates a very strong community in that village. It makes it very difficult for an enemy to infiltrate and corrupt or even invade militarily, because everyone knows each other. And this is a very strong element of. So I'm a very strong individualist myself, and I like that. So I like the ideas of entrepreneurship, of freedom, but I do recognize that we have an element of sharing. And as everything in life, the balance between your personal interest and the interest of your community is a fine line. It's something that you have to work, and especially today when all of this has been lost in many communities, you have to recreate it. It's not easy. It's not simple. It's something I talk in my book, definitely. I think it's very important in the survival strategy. You're not alone in your bunker with food. You are going to plan to have food to share. You're going to plan to work with your neighbors to share. My neighbors have cows and I have a nice land, so they can get grass from my land in their barn for the winter. And I don't make them pay. I don't have a contract with them. But then if I want some milk from their cows, they'll give me milk from their cows and things like that. So we recreate this, but then my neighbors are like me. They struggle the same way to get the snow out in the winter. They struggle the same way to get the water supply clean from the dirt that accumulated in the winter. We share, of course, the same ideas, because when nature is, when you're in the mountains, nature is not easy. It's winters are long, and therefore you shape your mind a bit of the same way. And our children play together, so of course we get along. We have to, and therefore we'll share some stuff. That's normal. It's the city, it's the anonymously, and the state that pays for everyone. Whenever there's a problem, the government comes in and, you don't have a job, here's some money. You're sick, here's some money. You're a single woman, here's some money for your children. So it gets away with your responsibility, and therefore you become immature in a way, and thus you don't think about the future anymore because someone's going to take care of you. Well, if that stops, you're in deep trouble. And I believe, and I'm sure you guys agree, that we are entering a phase which a lot of these things a lot of people take for granted are going to disappear.
Yeah. Yes. Was Bastiat said the state was the great fiction, and that everybody could live at the expense of everybody else. and I think in late modernity, that's increasingly what we see.
You know what fascinates me is how quickly we went from, in America, I mean, there are still places in America, very rural places, that you don't know about, and they're not going to tell you, whoever you are out there listening, because everybody at this point has, sort of realized that, if you don't live in a place that's, completely globo-homoed, then you don't need to tell anybody about it because they'll just show up and integrate you. But I ran across a photograph from 1952, which is like any like people listening to us could have still been alive, could have been alive already then, when a town got together and arrested their own sheriff because he was trying to confiscate the homestead of a widow, whose insurance payments had lapsed or something like that. That's less than a lifetime ago in the United States that, a town could just get together and, tell an insurance company to screw off.
Yeah. On that same vein, because I live on the periphery of Appalachia. I'm from the periphery of Appalachia, which, again, it's a hill region in some ways, I guess, like Switzerland, Mr. San Giorgio. But it has a history of county-level government that is almost medieval, and it did until the 1970s, where you would have, strings of different courts at different in different places that had overlapping responsibility, so that either court could hear a case or whatever. But each of these courts would each have their own constable and their own police department. And at one time, you would have one police department, because one court would issue a judgment against the other one, and cops from two different departments would show up and say, "You're not going to do that." And as far as I can tell, except for the Hatfields and McCoys, they always ended things without shooting each other. And just like Fulwer said, this is stuff that happened into the 1970s. My dad was one of those guys.
Yeah, and an armed society is a very polite society usually, because and an armed citizenry usually ensures ensures a government that actually talks with you instead of imposes laws upon you without discussion. So in Switzerland we are still in that. It's slowly getting erased, and slowly we are losing our culture and our rights. But we still have it. We're at the very, very last throes of it. So hopefully, sometimes I wish we collapse soon and fast, because then we can keep that culture.
I'm trying.
Otherwise, they're going to remove it, and then we have to, and then Switzerland will be lost, and we have to move to some freedom-loving country like Russia.
Yeah, and again, as an American who has never been to Switzerland, and I've been to Europe a lot, but I don't know Switzerland, so I only know really what Swiss and other Europeans tell me, is the fact that Switzerland has this armed to the teeth culture, that it can turn their able-bodied populace out and turn them into an army overnight, is part of why, as far as I can tell, they have not been absorbed into this, giant globalist, empire run by the EU that's just rotting anything. So I think that, again, what you said, that armed society needs to exist. And as you said, I mean, one thing that is Switzerland is the fact it's not just you guys have the guns, but you guys are organized into the state-sanctioned militia to fight. Yeah. And like we said prior, into the 1970s, these volunteers, well, they had the same sanction as any other police officer, but we have a problem right now, I see, that we have the gun culture, which is good. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the responsibility culture of, citizens filling like those enforcement roles that we used to.
Well, I would say two things. First of all, in Switzerland, we lost the cities. I mean, the big cities are lost. They're just as corrupt and may I curse on your show?
Yeah, go right ahead.
The big cities like Zurich, for example, or Geneva, or even the capital, Bern, they're completely fucked up in terms of culture, of de-responsibility. Of course, immigration plays a role, but I never blame the immigrants, by the way, on many things, because in fact it's our fault. We let them in, and we allowed the politics to let them in. The problem, I think, and I'm going to write a book on this. It's I'd say half done. But the problem with having guns at home to protect yourself against crime, but also against terrorism, because I think and another parenthesis, one of the ways Israelis protect themselves against terrorists is that 40% of them carry guns. So when there's a knife attack, well, maybe the terrorist can knife one guy, but then it's shot. And just the same way as in the US, when you have school shootings, things like that, obviously the media never covers the story where the guy who carries shoots the shooter immediately, and that stops right there. And it's not a mass shooting; it's just an attempted mass shooting. But they never cover that story, or they never say that over 1 million crimes are prevented cold because gun homeowners shoot or threaten to shoot the burglar or potential rapist or potential killer that comes into their houses. They never mention that. And so the problem, of course, for example, in America, if I may say one thing about America, which is negative, it is not the gun. It's the antidepressants and the drugs that 100% of these mass shooters or these unstable people who happen to have a gun and use it against innocent people, well, 100% of the times they are under strong medication. So obviously it's much politically interesting for tyrannical government to try to push for banning guns, when in reality they should really audit how the pharmaceutical and medical industry is drugging children and people for no reason often, and with very bad medication that is totally unproven to be efficient. And this is a huge problem that is much bigger than anything else, and obviously no one wants to talk about that.
Well, on top of that, the gun deaths, the statistics in the United States are also very skewed by suicide as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
So ours, we have a very low death rate by gun in Switzerland, obviously, but we do have one, but it's 100% suicide.
Really?
So obviously we probably have 1 or 2 murders per year with guns in Switzerland out of the population of 8 million, and however we do have a few hundreds suicides, obviously. So they always take, the journalists always mention, in Switzerland has about 200 dead by guns every year. Yeah. But it's people in their houses having a problem, and unfortunately, and I think it's a very, very bad decision. I'm strongly telling people, never suicide yourselves. You have much better things to do instead of suicide yourself. Whatever happens, don't do it. But still, they take that as a statistic, and it's typical game that journalists, which used to be a very important part of society, to tell facts to people, today are completely ideological, and they are part of the enemy of our nations and our people, and they soon are going to feel that this was not a very smart move for their own sake. I'm afraid.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the U.S., just 25 years ago, I remember local major affiliates connected to one of the national channels, the local affiliate that would provide news in the area, still covering, Confederate festivals in a positive light. And we're at this point today where you can basically be written out of public society for saying anything positive about preserving monuments. So, as you said, the media used to not be this openly hostile as it has become. And I believe I cut you off, Tyler.
No, you didn't.
Maybe I did.
I was going to ask, sir, as a Swiss, are you in the national service in the militia, or have you been in the past? Not entirely sure what ages. Yeah, usually what happens in Switzerland is that when you turn 18, you of course you go to selection, and army used to be 615,000 men when I was young. Now it's reduced to 150. So they do select much more now. But they used to take almost every youth, and in fact, for example, my older son is, when he turned 12, 1 year ago, he had the opportunity to go to the army to learn to shoot and assemble and disassemble and clean the army rifle that we have. So we can start very young. So we have a program. It's voluntary, of course. It's not mandatory for even kids as young as 12. And so when you're 18, they call you, and you have to do your and we don't have an officer school, so everyone has to start as a private. Everyone. There's no way you cut that. Yeah. And you start for a 4 months training,
And then every time, and then you have to go back 2 weeks per year until you're 40. The interesting element is that if you want to move up the chain, because they select you and they say, oh, you could be a non-commissioned officer, or you could be a sergeant, or you go up, and of course you become a second lieutenant, and then a first lieutenant, and then you go up, and then captain, and so on. Well, every time you have to do 4 months to learn the job, and then you have to do 4 months to do what you've learned. So you have to. So they train you with there's a little professional cadre, and then you go up. So basically, everyone who wants to go up, the command still is in a militia, and it still can do it. Now, very very great way to mix people from all backgrounds, because there's no officer school for rich kids and soldier school for the others. Everyone has to go to soldier school. So we don't have the problems that you see in France, or I can think of Italy, which has a very bad history of extremely bad officers, but and very class based. So in Switzerland that works very well, because then you also have people from mechanician, lawyer, children from rich and poor families together, and also from different regions. So you have German speakers, Italian speakers, French speakers who are together. They need to speak the same. They need to find common speaking grounds. They need to learn the stuff, and it's a very strong cohesion building tool. It's not as strong as before, because obviously the numbers are lower, and because globalization came, and the army was turned into ridicule by the journalists, by the left for many decades now. But we still have it. Now, as of myself, when I was young, I was stupid. I thought it was a waste of time. So I didn't do it. I choose not to do it. And I regret it, because I could have learned skills, I could have learned networks that I'm painfully trying to build over the last 10 years. Now, the good thing is that Switzerland has it's not a secret program, but very few people know about it. But we have a program for adult people to train ourselves with the facilities of the army on the weekends, when the army is off duty. Sometimes, not all, of course, but when most of the people go home for the weekend. There's some citizens that are trained by the army to be trainers. So we train to be trainers to create another army should the first one fall. So. And of course, it's against enemies, foreign and domestic. So it means we are creating a second line of defense, which is of citizens. So it's a kind of a militia, but it's kind of state sanctioned, but it's very discreet. Yeah. But it's not. It is legal. It is clearly in the light, and people know about it, but we don't talk about it too much.
What is this program called?
It doesn't have a name.
Okay.
It's on need to know basis, and you go, and it's a train the trainer kind of program. It's very, very nice.
I'm interested just because my background is one of the things I did in Iraq was an advisor training foreign armies. So that's something the United States doesn't exactly do a great job of. So countries like Germany that have a history of building a nucleus, a cadre for building a permanent army out of almost fascinating.
They did in 1807, and they did it in of course 1947 or 48. I can't remember. But
yeah. The United States, to me, just as an American military officer, that's completely foreign. It's like
first LGBT battalion doing.
Oh yeah. The joke about the 40% casualties. Oh, yeah. Well, they blocked trans. The last I heard.
Yep.
Yeah, male homosexuals I have known very few of in the army, and most of them when I was in, because don't ask, don't tell was designed essentially to not go out. If people didn't create problems, you didn't look for them.
The tranny ban was just upheld like yesterday.
Yeah, the federal courts. You were saying, Mr. San Giorgio?
Yeah, sorry, no, it was just the funny thing, because yesterday I was giving a conference in France, and we were joking that in the nuclear launching submarines of France. Now they have women.
Oh,
And of course I was, because of the law, because of equality and all that. So I was thinking, 150 men and a few women underwater for 6 months. What could go wrong?
Yeah, no shit, right? Yeah, that was was a nuclear subs until they had the final integration. Was it 2012 or whatever? They held out to the last minute for that reason. That essentially it was stupid even to put women on a sub because you wouldn't have the restroom facilities to have segregated restrooms.
Exactly. But also a lot of things can happen in 6 months with a woman. A woman can go in not being pregnant and having to deliver a baby in a submarine because you don't know after 3 months. Yeah, some women don't know or don't want to tell. And plus, you can imagine the romances potential, the jealousy. Now, the problem is already severe if you have one woman, but put two, and then you are exponentially growing the problems because now you have problems with two women together. And anyway, I don't want to go into that topic, but you can just imagine how our societies are creating problems where none existed before. And believe me, I go a lot in Russia.
Yeah.
And Russian people who actually like us because, for them, for many years, America, like for me, for example, you should check out the people who are listening to us. If you check out I did a video in Florida once when I was, giving my thoughts on how, when I was a kid, America was an incredible country. It was something you could look, it was really the city upon the hill we Europeans looked up to, and it was the example of everything that was right. You could work and make a lot of money, you could be successful and people wouldn't judge you. You had great American products were the best in the world. You had this great nation, and Russia is the same. They look at us, they look at you, they look at for them we have been so successful, and now they hear all these stories about all these societal changes that we do, and they can't believe it, and they say, "But you are crazy. You're first of all you're doing the same mistakes we did 80 years ago with communism. You're going to suffer immensely, and you don't even realize." And then they see all these societal changes, and they're very, very, it's a tough life in Russia because of the winters and the history they've had. I mean, these guys, every time they have a war, they lose 20 million people. They're tough as steel, and yet they have big hearts, especially when they drink a bit. But they open up and they say, "You guys are crazy." And so I go in Russia a lot, and they cannot believe what we're doing, and I don't know if they know that we have women on submarines, but I can tell you they don't have women on their submarines.
Yeah, which I would say it's interesting because the Russians, the Soviet military was one of the first militaries to experiment with integrating the genders.
That's true.
And they did. After that, they largely disintegrated them or removed them from integration. And Israel is the other one because everybody points, or you'll always hear feminists say Israel has female infantry.
Yeah.
After the War of Independence.
The same way.
Go ahead, sir.
They don't manage it the same way. They don't have integrated combat units.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the women are like in the US. It used to be fairly separated.
Yeah, I was going to say Israel because after the War of Independence, that was one of the first findings was removing women from combat units. But Israel has female infantry battalions, but those are segregated infantry battalions, and they actually need male soldiers to fill them to full strength. In some years, they have close to 70% men in the supposedly women unit. But the other thing is, one of the two female battalions only saw combat the first time like 3 years ago, and this is a country that's been at war for 70 years, and you have a combat arms infantry unit that is just now seeing combat, so that tells you where they were deployed, though.
No, and actually, to be very fair, I wrote a book on women. The book "Women on the Verge of Societal Breakdown" talks about feminism and talks about how, first of all, feminism has been a way for money powers to screw women in a way, to make them slave wages just as men.
Yeah.
So
make
in
them
fact,
taxable.
it has been a disaster for women. But I do recognize that women can do a lot of things that men do. I'm not saying that women can't be soldiers. Women can be combatants. In fact, in many wars, especially in resistance warfare, in guerrilla warfare, they have a history of being, very motivated, very good. And when the Polish uprising against Nazi Germany was full of a lot of Polish women, because they have a lot of stake in making sure their country can be liberated from foreign powers. Even if I dislike them, if you look at the communist guerrillas in Latin America or in Cuba, they had a fair share of women. Now, not necessarily always in the combat units. That's true. Often it was in logistics, in signals, in communications, but certainly women have an important role to play, and of course in society, and of course in the family, and of course that's not the question. The question is really that it has been used. Women have been manipulated to destroy society with the destruction of the family, and this is it's a 1 century old process. But you're very right. The Soviets, they had air regiments of fighter planes, of bombing planes, night bombing planes of women. They had sniper units of women only, and so on. Well, they needed all the manpower they could get, we should say the person power they could get. But certainly, yeah. We can say this as a joke, but in reality, it's a very serious element of the destruction of our societies. And one of the interesting element, Richard Spencer, who published my book, when he first read my book, the first translation, he said, what's interesting is that in your book you talk about the economic collapse and how everything is going to unravel, but he said to me, and that was very, very smart. He said, but everything else already collapsed. The family, the morals, the values, the traditions. In most of the places, in the cities for sure, it has collapsed already. And the only thing that is still going is the economy, it's the consumption. But remove that, because you add one layer of problems such as, hyperinflation, financial collapse, the bankruptcy of the state. You add that, and then that's it. Then you have nothing to hold the structure up.
Yeah.
And indeed, Dmitry Orlov, who studied the Soviet collapse and lived through it in the 90s, he was telling that, yes, Russia suffered immensely in the 90s of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and people were very hungry, and it was difficult, but they survived because they could stick together, and because they had little gardens, and they had this resilience. But in the Western world, especially in America, but also in the big cities of Europe, London, Paris, there's no food. There's no networks of resilience. There's no networks of people who know each other. No one has a house in the countryside where it has a little winter garden and growing food. That doesn't exist. You have 1% of the people with hugely mechanized harvesters and trucks and tractors producing food, which require a huge amount of very specialized fertilizers and chemicals and oil, of course, to make all of this, gasoline to make all of this work. It requires an incredibly complex transformation and transportation, logistical system, supply and demand that gets all the food to the cities. You stop that, everyone is starving in less than a week. And so that's it. And then it's over.
Yeah.
80% of the people die. It's very quick.
Definitely, I was going to say, just when a major snowstorm hits, and again, as Southerners, we're not very good at snow, I'll be honest with it. Understand in the South, when we get a major snowfall, it's like Jesus coming back. We know it was going to happen. We didn't think today.
I've never even been in the snow, so yeah.
Yeah, so the joke is after 3 days, when the grocery stores have been disrupted for like 1.5 resupply cycles and things are running out throughout the town, and you start seeing people get testy, and it's, as you said, a week. I think about day 5 you would start seeing violence.
Sure. You've seen, there's very interesting case studies that I've studied for one of my previous books on, of course, Hurricane Sandy, when it hit the East Coast, and suddenly you had people selling fuel at $20 or $50 per gallon. And then you had electricity cut for millions and millions of people. And that's a small collapse. That's a local collapse. And the people are already behaving badly, and at the same time they know that a few days in the future there's going to be electricity again, and there's going to be some help. This is not like a countrywide or a global collapse that increases as the time goes by. Also, when something really bad happens in Japan, you see that the local culture, for example, when there was a tsunami hitting Japan back in 2011? Well, everyone, they suffered in silence. They reorganized. They helped each other. No pillage of the markets. No, everyone behaved very well because it's first of all, it's a homogeneous culture. And when, however, you have a hurricane hitting Katrina hitting New Orleans in 2005, well, suddenly people go and ramshackle and pillage, the supermarkets to get shoes and to get hi-fi equipment and to steal the flat screen TVs. So our culture on a very large scale. So I don't want to put everyone into that picture. Of course, you understand, but our culture in the West has become one of very, very bad ways to react to problems.
Yeah, social atomization is remove the resiliency. So.
Yes,
but you were saying, sorry, I cut you off.
No, yeah, and I was trying to find the word, and it's all ethnics really. Some more than others, but definitely we're all in a culture. Look at Black Fridays when people stormed the stores. Like their life depended on it, just to have some cheap deals on some unimportant equipment.
Yeah, I used to be an armored car driver, the crews that go back and forth from stores picking up money. And the joke is Black Friday every year is like the Tet Offensive, where everybody goes to sleep, with their full body armor on, and they roll out of bed thinking they're going to go fight the giant red hordes. So I've seen the worst part of that front. But I was going to say Fulworth is from Acadia, so he's familiar with the whole Katrina and related issues.
Well, I'm from the West Florida parishes, but that which got hit considerably worse by Katrina.
These are all parts of Louisiana, by the way. We're arguing about. Like,
if you've ever seen a map of Louisiana, it's the part that's north of New Orleans, right next to Mississippi. I saw what you mean. Katrina went pretty much exactly over my house.
So you didn't steal flat screen TV,
Wait, excuse me.
Did you steal any? Were you looting? Is what he's asking.
Oh, good Lord, no! In fact, actually, that was an incredibly formative experience for me. So that happened when I was a teenager at the time, and we didn't know about all of the looting that was going on. This is like one of these situations where people everywhere else in the world knew more than me about what was going on. 30 miles from where I lived,
because power goes
and
out,
but for about six or 7 weeks, the whole Mississippi Gulf Coast, Mississippi, Louisiana area was just a total, it was basically anarchy, and it was orderly. It wasn't comfortable by any means. I wouldn't want to go back and relive it, but I do, have like a lot of really fond memories of this. It's like there's not many Americans who can say they've had to go fish for food before, that are still alive right now. And then when we got power back, and we saw all the the footage of looting, from across the lake and everything like that, it was like, wow, that's a tale of a tale of two cities. And there, I've sort of spent the last 10 years trying to figure out exactly what the difference was, and this is where I landed. So it was incredibly formative for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine having it that early. I can understand how something that bad you can look back on fondly, the same way as in people who look back on World War II fondly. I know people who are POWs who look back on it fondly, so I think there's something about being resilient and having a good attitude and being surrounded by like-minded people that can make the shittiest circumstances.
Well, it's like one of the things is like, we've been talking about bunker mentalities and everything. I've spent the last few weeks, I think it was the Musonius and Fulwar episode was the first time I really started hitting this really hard. is, talking about as the American empire's, system starts to break down or whatever. This is that, if you look at this from the right perspective, all of a sudden you're regaining a lot of the agency that has, that you lost under the modern state. Like, it's not going to, probably not going to be something where you need to get in the bunker and not talk to anybody for years and years and years. There's a lot of opportunity inside, an empire winding down. If you had gone to ask, Pepin the Short what he thought of the Roman Empire collapsing, he would have been like, "That's the best thing ever."
Again, like you said, even if you're hypothetically in a proverbial bunker, you're going to be dealing with a lot of people in order to eat after your 30 days of rations gets consumed. So, and again, it's just like Mr. San Giorgio said earlier, it's the ability to network, the ability to build and maintain real community relationships matters more than anything. And again, I'm not anti-guns, because that's what people accused us of the last time, but we're saying that guns without community, without other people to protect you, are also useless, is what we're trying to communicate.
I was studying, when I was writing the book on the nuclear bacteriological chemical events, and I co-wrote it with a specialist of the French army, and we were studying, and we went to look at the archive documents that were made in the 1950s when America started to have a program for prevention for its population in case of nuclear war. And likewise, I went to look at the psychological studies that were done in Switzerland. Switzerland used to have a policy where every house, every building had nuclear shelters. So we have many. I have not one in my farm, but for example, in my family, in my parents' house, there is one. Small, very small, with big concrete and big steel doors, and everyone has that here. And the literature was saying you should have 2 weeks of food and water for people in those shelters. And of course, why 2 weeks? I mean, why not 3? Why not 4? I mean, what's the rationale between 2 weeks? And of course, they were saying, because after 2 weeks, radiation levels fall, which is true, but that was not the reason. The reason was that they made psychological studies on test groups that they tried to put people in shelters and observe how they would react. And after 2 weeks, you go apeshit. You go completely insane. You cannot stand the smell, the unclean people, the waste that is accumulating, and you just can't stand the people that are with you after 2 weeks in the room. And so they said, well, after 2 weeks, people will get out anyway. So let's not make them afraid. Let's say that they have to stay in the shelter for 2 weeks, and so they have an objective, and after that they will go out anyway if we don't tell them. So that's it. So sometimes policies are not necessarily done for your best safety. They are done because there are other parameters, and that you will not just follow differently. So I agree. The bunker mentality is not the way. I mean, a bunker is like a tool. Sometimes it makes sense, especially if you live next to let's say a potential target in a nuclear war, and if you believe that nuclear war is a potential scenario, sure, why not build one? But a lot of people, they say, I can block myself in a bunker, and then if looters come, they cannot come in. Yeah, but they will burn to the ground the town you used to live in, and then what? Yeah. Then you go out, and why not defending your town? Why not organizing a militia? Why not? And so on and so on. So you have to be careful not to fall down into a simple solution to complex problems.
Exactly.
Well, that's a refrain I could you go around screaming at everybody all day.
Which is, Mussonia says that very much. And one of the points I like to repeat ad nauseum is nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's coming to save us. And the reason I say that is like those whole issues, the relationships that go into governance. nobody's coming to save us. We have to take responsibility for those things because at some point or another, we're going to have to. And yeah, as you've said before, Mr. San Giorgio, all cooperation is based on force on some level, but you still have to have the cooperation in order for the force to matter. You have to have the means of communication, the relationships, and the
authority.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
Sorry, and the authority. You need to build the moral authority.
Exactly. Yeah, which is one of those issues. I mean, it's on so many different levels. The levels of trust and the ability of just the intangibles of leadership, the moral authority to lead other people, and you can only get that by doing it and practicing it. And
it's also important to realize that different people are starting, and on different rungs of this ladder.
Very much so. Yeah, I do.
Like,
yes.
Depending on where you are, you might have a much bigger problem in the event of a quote unquote, collapse. If you live in, on Manhattan Island, you got a lot more stuff to worry about than somebody who lives in, Lafayette, Louisiana, or in St. Augustine, Florida.
Very different risks to manage. Yeah. I don't want to cut us off here because I think we're having a good conversation. I've got to leave shortly. You are recording, aren't you, Tyler?
Yes.
So that I wanted to ask y'all. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. San Giorgio. Would you like to go much further? Is there anything else?
I have about half an hour more if you want.
Okay, I've only got about 10, 15 minutes. So we definitely want to have you on again in the future, sir. I definitely appreciate this, and I've watched your stuff for years. That's the biggest things. Anybody else have any key questions or want to run out or discuss, guys?
I think it would take more than 30 minutes if we got into it. So I would say a follow-up episode would definitely be the route to go. Yeah,
definitely, Ty. How about you, Fulworth?
No, I don't have any specific questions. I'm happy to stick around as long as anybody else is, though.
If that's the case, then I'm going to go ahead and call the episode, guys. And we would definitely like to have you back on again.
Sure, with pleasure.
Yeah, our main co-host Masonius would definitely love to talk to you, and he's a big paleo libertarian. So
I do want to take a minute. I do want to take a minute and gloat about how right I was about Venezuela. That was my outside prediction for 2019 was like some sort of kerfluffle in Latin America, and then I didn't even have to wait 2 weeks, and we were already down there meddling.
Yeah, so we'll call it today on 24th January 2019. For Skipwith was completely right about Venezuela going up.
There we go.
Okay, so Mr. San Giorgio, would you like to take a moment just to tell our audience, where they can go and find your stuff, your material, and what?
Sure. Well, the easiest way to connect with me is through my website, piero.com. But if you want to do the pleasure to read my books, you find them on Amazon very easily, and you can find some of my videos in English on my YouTube channel, which is also easy to find. And I love to hear from my readers and from people who criticize what I write, who bring me ideas, who bring me positive comments, who bring me polite, negative comments. I enjoy that. So feel free to, of course, read my book. Today we've talked only of a tiny element of what I write about, but certainly an important one. And I'm easy to find. And thank you very much for your invitation. And in fact, check the interview I did with Chomsky. I think it's quite interesting. And we can organize this another time for sure.
Definitely. Like I said to the audience, Mr. San Giorgio has had some really good interviews where he engages in good faith but doesn't pull punches. I know, like I said, you interviewed Chomsky, you've interviewed guys from Génération Identitaire. I know you interviewed a Zionist about 6 months ago, an Israeli Zionist, hardcore right-wing Zionist, and talked about the alt-right in a positive light of all things. So it's you're definitely one of those channels that doesn't give a fuck about the criticism. And that's really enjoyable in 2019.
Wait,
an interview with Chomsky?
Yes.
I met him.
Oh man.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
I've interviewed even I don't know if he unfortunately passed away because he was a sensible guy, a guy called William Bloom,
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Very interesting anti-imperialistic guy who was against the American empire since the Vietnam War. So he was not as of course, he didn't have the credentials of a Chomsky, but his books are, of course, he's a communist. I mean, you don't have to take everything he writes, he used to write, face value. But he had very, very interesting newsletters, and his books about the American empire were extremely interesting. And you have to it's very important to listen to, of course, intelligent people who you disagree with, because sometimes you learn a lot. And on the same way, I've interviewed some Muslim scholars. And as you mentioned, yes, I interviewed, and I'll be happy to do it again, some Israeli politicians. And I like to go everywhere where I can learn, everywhere I can get ideas, because I don't want I want to confront my stereotypes and my ideas to the reality, so that I can learn and so that I can make an opinion for myself. For example, I had to read the Quran twice to understand what is the doctrine of the Muslim people that are increasing in numbers in my countries. And so I want to learn from them. And I went to talk with them in good faith and said, look, you're new guys in town. What do you believe in? What do you say? What's your stuff? Because I see the way you act, and I understand the media will lie about you just as it lies about me. So I want to know for sure. And I learned. And then I said, okay, now I know. Now I know that we cannot live together. I understand why. We don't need to be enemies, but eventually we need to find the solution, because it's not going to be possible long term that you stay in my land. But okay, we can discuss, and it's still better than cutting each other's throat, right? So I'm trying to do this because I've studied military history, and I come from a country who is extremely poor in the last century, by the way, not Switzerland. I'm talking Italy originally, who was extremely bad at doing war. I'm writing a novel right now that is set in the 1930s and 40s with someone I used to know that fought in the war for Italy. And what he was telling me is appalling of amateurism, of the way you don't learn the skills of your enemy, you don't learn the strength of the enemy, where you disrespect your enemy, and then you get whipped, you get spanked, you get defeated.
Yeah.
So it's very important to learn and listen and have open-minded, and to never have hate, to always be, respectful of everything in the world. I'm respectful of nature, respectful of life, respectful of people's beliefs. Of course, you can joke, you can pull people's legs, you can. Sometimes I'm a provocateur. I like to provoke people. I like to, but the reason is because I want reaction from people. As one of the first things I write in my book is to say, don't believe what you're going to read in my books. Think by yourselves. Take this, challenge what is written in the book. Go on the internet, learn by yourself. Don't believe anyone. Don't believe the media. Don't believe me. Learn by yourself. Think by yourself, because then you will be convinced, and you will have, faith in the sense that you have your heart and your mind at the same place. And this is the only way you can then have the right attitude. Otherwise, it's just a fashion. It's just a fad. And then you will not do the right things long term. I think it's something that works in my life. It works in many people I admire. So why not?
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, there's definitely a place for people who we would call far right, or at least that's what our critics call us, to actually engage people in good faith with those ideas, just to learn. And again, not every media outlet's going to do that, but I think we try to do it to a different degree. And like I said, we've had Israelis on, or an Israeli military historian on our show, so you have to be willing to learn.
Was that Martin Krevel?
It was. Yep.
Yes, I know him.
Do you?
I met him.
Yeah. As a military officer, he's one of those big intellectual influences. It was really great to meet him digitally. So
yeah, he's a genius, and he's very friendly. So yeah, I met him once.
Yeah, he's an impressive guy. Anyways, I apologize for my abruptness, but I'll have to go shortly before my studio is confiscated. So I definitely appreciate it, Mr. San Giorgio, and we'd hope to have you on again in the future.
Godspeed. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. For this fair land of freedom, I do not care a damn. I'm glad I fought against it, I only wish we'd won. And I don't want no pardon for anything I've done. I hates the Constitution, this great republic too. I hates the Freedmen's Bureau in uniforms of blue. I hates the nasty eagle with all his brags and fuss. The lying, thieving Yankees, I hate some worse and less. I hates the Yankee nation and everything they do. I hates the Declaration of Independence too. I hates the glorious Union, 'tis dripping with our blood. I hates their striped banner, I fit it all I could. Followed old Mass Robert for 4 years near about. Got wounded in 3 places and starved at Pint Lookout. I caught the rheumatism at camping in the snow. But I killed a chains of Yankees, I'd like to kill some more. $300,000 Yankees are stiff in southern dust. We got 300,000 before they conquered us. They died of southern fever, southern steel and shot. I wish there was 3 million instead of what we got. Now I can't take up my musket and fight them now no more. But I ain't gonna love them, that is certain sure. And I don't want no pardon for what I was and am. I won't be reconstructed and I don't care a damn. Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am.
Trust damn urbanite.